Sometimes I just wonder and I shake my head, and it's just disgusting that through all of these years, journalists, mainstream media, with all the documentaries and everything out there, people still do not understand how or why things happen inside the penitentiary. I'm ARHayes. It's Convict's Thoughts. Let's dive back into the Derek Chauvin stabbing. New news came out kind of describing exactly what happened and who did it and why they feel as though he did it. It's a joke. It's an absolute joke that anybody would even believe what's being said, much less how it got set up or how it happened or why. Now, yes, inmates get stabbed on a regular. 22 times Derek Chauvin got stabbed by what's called a prison shank. It is a weapon that is made within the facility. Sometimes they're actually snuck into the penitentiary to where you could actually have a real knife or a blade or a weapon, but most times they're manufactured while you're in there. I've seen them all the time made out of any type of material that you could even imagine. Even use toothbrushes or toothpaste containers, all the way down to rocks that have been filed down from the rec yard. Most of the time, it's a pretty blunt object that comes manufactured out of a piece of steel. That's why they call it on the yard steel. They laid the steel to somebody. They find it, whether it be from the fence of the rec yard, maybe it's out of the maintenance shop. It's not that hard to get something to make a weapon out of. I mean, I hate to say that, it's just not. So, Derek Chauvin, being an ex police officer, this is going to happen to him anytime he's in the general public or able to get got to. This time, it just happened to happen inside the law library on a Tucson federal penitentiary, a medium penitentiary. He evidently was in the law library by himself. What's that mean? I know what it means. They're never going to tell you what that means because they want to protect the absolute truth. But for all of those who have served time, we all know what happens. A blind eye allows for things violently to happen, whether it come down to a financial means that helps that blind eye, or whether it actually be a gang or an affiliation hit. Ladies and gentlemen, Derek Chauvin has a green light on him just the same as a Chris Watts or any of those high profile inmates that have done things that other inmates will not stand for. When you are law enforcement, you cannot be on a normal yard. You have an automatic hit on you. Now, the gentleman's name is John Turzak. The funny thing about it is they specify that he's a part of a Mexican mafia gang. Now, what really makes you want to scratch your head is this is an ex-FBI informant. So he's been serving 30 years. He's got 2 years left to the gate. And miraculously, he goes and stabs an ex-police officer, high-profile inmate, in the law library of a federal penitentiary, literally about ready to go home after a 30-year sentence. Why does this happen? Why does it happen? Because it's mandated, ladies and gentlemen. It's mandated. And here in a minute, I'm going to share you a story in regards to inmates that I was housed with in Arizona that were literally 1 foot out the door, and something like this occurred in a much worse scenario than the Derek Chauvin scenario. Now, it's stated that he is actually in the hospital in stable condition, so that will tell you something right there. If an inmate is continuously held within the hospital setting, not brought back to the yard, he has substantial life-threatening injuries. They're not going to release to you how close to death he came, But I can tell you this based off my experience, 22 stabs, he's probably pretty close. Now, the funny thing that made me laugh is they still claim this John Terzak to be a part of a Mexican mafia gang. In Arizona, I guess that's possible, depending on where he comes from, that he could run with the Mexican gang. But what really people need to understand is Arizona is one of the most racially political states in the whole country when it comes to the penitentiaries. California, Arizona, Colorado, Texas, New Mexico. This is the rum shot area that if you're housed in these areas, it's a violent war scene between the races. Now, the whites and the Hispanics have come to an agreement that they are able to work together on a yard. If something were ever to transpire with a Mexican situation, the whites would back that. If something were to pop within the whites, the Mexicans would back the whites when it becomes a racially motivated situation. Now, the difference between federal penitentiaries and state penitentiaries is very simple. In the state penitentiaries, within that violent political area that I'm describing, you can never get into an issue with another race unless you have permission. If for some reason it does transpire, let's just use an example. You have a white inmate that gets into it with a black inmate without the permissions to allow that to happen, it becomes what's called a race riot. Everybody jumps. If one jumps, everybody jumps. And now, within that deemed area, Hispanics back the whites, whites back to Hispanics, unless it's between those two races. Typically, when it's between those two races, it is forced to be a 1-on-1, a 2-on-2. It's an equal fight between the people that are involved, only because they stand together on the yard to ensure they always have power and numbers. Also, because those two races work together, it controls the business aspect within the yard, the financial, the money, the drugs, the trade, the bartering, the poker playing, the gambling. It's ran between those two. Now, does that mean the other races don't get a piece of that? Of course, they have their own way of making that work. But in that realm of the affiliations and gangs, most part in these areas, it's ran by the bigger political race team, which is the whites and the Hispanics. Now, for the federal penitentiary, you have a wider range of who interacts with who because you can be shipped anywhere within the country. State inmates stay within the state unless you are transferred to a state under a contract that houses said transfer inmates. Like Arizona used to have contracts with Indiana, Oklahoma, Denver, Colorado, to where inmates from Arizona, if they were at a lower level custody, could be transferred out of state and housed at some of those other penitentiaries to lower the amount of people and population in the state of Arizona. Arizona would pay those states to house them. Arizona was well known for bringing in the Hawaiian inmates until it got too violent and they could no longer do that. So, in the feds, you're already being moved all over the country just because, let's say, your crime was committed in Arizona. If you're a federal inmate, you could be housed all the way on the East Coast. The hard part for that for inmates is the fact that the politics are different everywhere you go. So the federal penitentiary does have different politics in a sense when it comes to the races than the state levels do. That's most likely why, at this point, a white individual could be part of a Hispanic gang. We've also seen it in the feds and other states where white people would run with black gangs and black members would run with white gangs. It's an odd thing for me because of what I was known for within the affiliations and the politicalness of the races being from the West Coast, that when I went east, it was a whole new spectrum to me. So I would only interact with people that understood what I was coming from and I understood what they were coming from. So we had a smaller group of individuals that stayed tight knit, that only defended what we believed in. I didn't go venturing around trying to learn the politics of all the different places I was housed. So, I mean, it does state in here, which is ridiculously stupid, that the reason why this inmate stabbed Derek Chauvin was not because he was law enforcement or because he was a high profile case. He said that he actually thought about it for over a month's worth of time before he actually did it, and he did it on Black Friday to resemble for George Floyd's death, which, okay, I guess that could possibly make sense, but also for some other weird aspects that I think, in all honesty, he was telling stories to the authorities that were interviewing him in regards to why he did what he did. I don't think he gave up the reasoning, the real and true reasoning of why he did what he did. Look, ladies and gentlemen, for somebody to get got in the law library on a yard like this, to where other people should not be able to get just right up behind you and handle stuff like this, especially to somebody like Chauvin, who should be on high alert and high risk monitoring. And this individual was able to get right up on him with nobody there to even try to stop him. So somebody turned their back and somebody was most likely paid to do so, or the person that turned their back and their eyes away from it believed that this individual should have the shot to get his hands on Derek Chauvin. It's a hard game in the penitentiary. People really need to come to the realization you are never safe. It doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter how high up the food chain you are. Somebody is always out to get you. And it's not that hard to actually have doors opened for said beatings or stabbings to happen. I mean, I guess I got to be careful in all the different details I give away because I'm not trying to give you the ins and outs of everybody's secrets. But trust me, people get paid, the money flows, it's well paid, more so than what an actual state or correctional officer's wage normally is, and it just opens the door for things like this to happen. Before I get into my little story of how I can talk about something like this happening and how someone with their foot on the way out the door can get involved, let me kind of give you the idea of what this individual, John Turzak, is now facing. He was literally, like I said, serving a 30-year sentence with 2 years left to the gate. Now, after causing this whole escalated situation to happen in the said law library, he probably should have sat down and read all of the different charges that he'll be facing. Obviously, he's going to be facing the attempted murder charges, which will carry approximately 20 years apiece in the different charges that they'll actually charge him with. On top of that, he will be charged with manufacturing of a weapon and other small penitentiary crimes that could add up to another 10 years. So at this time, if they ran all of those consecutively, which they absolutely can because he's going to be considered a habitual offender, he could be facing another 30 years. Now, this individual was a high-ranking Mexican mafia leader back in the day, and he was found guilty of murdering 3 men and ordering hits on 8 others in the first death penalty case tried to Los Angeles federal court. So I guess he was a somebody, and then he became an informant and helped the federal people out. And I don't know what transpired for him to no longer be an informant, but something between him and the actual federal government turned him to where he was no longer an informant. Actually, it states right here that the agency dropped him because he was accused of plotting murders while on the government's payroll. Interesting, right? You've got a FBI informant who was a convicted felon on the government's payroll, and he was plotting murders while on that's a great way of actually getting people incorporated that you could trust, and that I think, most of our country would definitely want to put their hard-earned governmental money, tax money, into. Very nice. Very nice. He felt as though that he once told a judge that he deserved a lighter sentence on his violent crimes because he had an agreement to work with the FBI agents. That's crazy. I mean, that's crazy to me. In November 2001 is when he received his 30-year sentence, and he went to prison for racketeering, conspiring to kill a rival gang member, and many other charges. So that kind of gives you an idea of what you're looking for. And of course, Derek Chauvin's mother is asking where were the guards when all of this happened. And, thankfully her son was able to fight him off before he lost his life. So let me get into real quick. We're going to set Derek Chauvin aside. And I don't really talk the politics on a lot of cases like this because, as we know, in our country, this was a huge case that affected many within our country in regards to racial tensions and, things that are going on within the police department. I'm not going to deep dive into all of that. We all have our opinions, and nobody's here to say you're right or wrong within those opinions. All I can state is Derek Chauvin received a prison sentence both within the state. He received one also within the federal. He lost both cases. One of them, he actually pled guilty on his own. He didn't even take it to trial. So that one he couldn't even fight, where his state charges were dismissed before they even got through the appeal process because they didn't feel like he had a case to appeal. I'm not here to say it's right or wrong. I'm not against LE. I know that law enforcement has one of the hardest tasks within our country, and the only statement that I think I could properly make in regards to something of this nature is it would come down to training. I don't think Derek Chauvin came into the force with the idea that he was going to take somebody's life in a very prominent way like this. I don't believe that's the case. I believe he worked his job. I think he went through the hardships of what the job entailed, and he happened to get himself into a predicament to where his training probably didn't benefit him. Could it be more than that? Maybe. But I don't know his whole story or the entire background of his training or what he was as a person prior to being law enforcement. So we'll just kind of rack it up that these types of things happen, and it's hard to justify why they do or don't. But I would think that if they were better staffed, better funded, and had more training, maybe less things like this would happen. Now, in the penitentiary, when I was in the penitentiary, a situation arose quite like this one in regards to 3 people within the race that I was obviously in, the Caucasians, the whites, in Arizona. 3 young men literally had their foot out of the door of the penitentiary. Now, two of them were not serving long sentences, but they were there for more than 5 years, and they were literally less than 30 days for one, and another one was 90 days or less to the gate. Now, a couple of the other individuals had worked their sentences down to less than a handful of years from much longer sentences, 18 years, and I believe the other was 22 years, to just a handful, and they would be going home as well. There was an individual on our prison yard that had a green light status on him, which means if that said individual walks anywhere near you and you have the capability to get your hands on him, you must do it. It doesn't matter the circumstance, it doesn't matter the reasoning. If it's a green light situation, you better jump and you better handle it. There's no stopping and yielding like there's a yellow light. There's no red light stopping you because you're almost out the gates. If you do not handle that, you will not make it out the gates. It doesn't matter why. Do it or you get done. That's it. That's the whole purpose. So these four individuals put their mighty selves together, concocted a way to get to this said green lighted individual, and they took his life in a very graphic nature. Two other individuals who also were short timers that had no affiliation, no reason to even be involved, got drug into it to hide and conceal and destroy evidence. So sadly, at the end of the day, you had a whole collective group of inmates that had no knowledge of even why something had to happen or who they were actually getting their hands on. They had probably never met or talked to the individual, but they knew because of everybody around there trying to get at that individual and kites flying that that person had a green light on them. Well, now all six of them are serving multi-life sentences. They're not going home. As a matter of fact, one of them lost their lives in a whole nother situation. That was a very young man, and he was the one with less than 90 days to go home. These are the type of things that happen. The guards allowed it to happen. They knew what was happening, they turned their back, and they allowed the actual happening of the green light to transpire and take place. Money was involved, drugs was involved. There was a lot of different reasons why people turned their heads and looked the other way. So yes, I do have people that reach out to me and ask me various questions on, are guards involved? Yes. Do they take payments? Yes. Are these things common? Absolutely. They happen daily. Maybe sometimes more than once daily. I've had it happen to me where I had something coming my way. I didn't ever have a green light on me, but I had some personal issues that needed to get handled, and the person I had the issue with had the power and the clout to get the cell doors popped so that we would have to handle business. And sometimes I got from behind. It just happens. That's what prison is. Fight or flight. You either put up a great fight or you're going to be taking a flight in a helicopter. I know many of you out there that have been through this know exactly what I'm talking about. For those of you that don't know what I'm talking about, yet it's a little bit interesting to you, stay out of trouble. Don't go to prison, because these are the type of things that happen all the time. Good people do not always walk out of the penitentiary. That one little mistake that only cost them a couple years of their life, deemed by a judge, became their death sentence. It's very sad. It's very, very sad. What's even harder about this is when an individual like myself that's been around all these and been right in the middle and thick of it get released from the penitentiary, it takes us time to overcome it. We have to go through counseling. We have to go through many means to get our mental and emotional state back to normal. That's something that I've been battling since the day I was released from prison. It's not something that's easy. You have to realize for months I did not sleep in the same bed as my wife because I couldn't have anybody near me because I didn't trust the fact I wasn't going to get got. I still, to this day, don't walk through Walmart. I can't. I flip out. It's a mental thing. I can't go shopping like most people do because I don't trust what's coming behind me. Derek Chauvin, this is round one. It's not over. I don't care what stories mainstream media and journalists make about it being Black Friday shopping and all this stuff. This was a green lighted hit on your life, and that hit and that green light will forever stand until it's no longer. I'm ARHayes. Another conversation about the place you don't want to be, prison. A convict's thoughts. Great night. Talk to you soon.